When we grow up, we're often conditioned to try to shake things off or to move past them instead of to deal with them. So we are ill-equipped to deal with this devastation when it actually happens to us. It's just so difficult.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place.
Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Authentic Conversations. I am here. I am solo today, and I wanted to take a mid-season or mid-part one season break of sorts to just kind of reset the stage as to some of the reasons why I have been on the theme I have for season 3 of this podcast. So if you've been following along, you're probably familiar with the fact that I set out in April of 2022 to write a book. Through a couple of different iterations, I ultimately set off on a path writing a book on my past wounds. And that book is going to be released here pretty soon, which I'm really excited about. I'll be announcing dates for that launch pretty soon. Would love for you to get involved. If you want to learn more, if you want to get involved, and involved would be joining a community that is going to commit to potentially buying a book, sharing the book and the story on your social media accounts, just promoting it, maybe writing reviews. And in doing so, we are going to offer all kinds of really cool giveaways. So autographed copies of the book to everybody that's in the community. We're going to have a special merchandise, hats, shirts, and things like that are going to be made specifically for the book community. And then a lot of other really cool giveaways. So if you want to participate in that, I would be honored for you to participate in that. You can go to woundsbook.com. That's WOUNDSBOOK.com. You go to woundsbook.com. You can submit your information there. And we will follow up with you and update you really soon as more information becomes available. So we are pumped. This is just going to be an incredible second half of 2023 with the launch of this book. Anyway, so, as I was writing the book, obviously that was, maybe not obviously if you're hearing this for the first time, but that was exploration of the wounds that I have incurred over the course of my life and how those have impacted me. And so this season of Authentic Conversations that we kicked off at the beginning of 2023, we're doing the first half up through the middle of June. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back for the second half of 2023 to finish off the season, and that's going to be walking through the specific chapters of the book. But we've been talking a lot. I've been talking individually as I've been sharing, and then with a lot of my guests about their own wounds and how those things have impacted their life, and both to the negative and the positive. And so I just wanted to take a couple of minutes today. This isn't going to be a very long episode, I don't think, but I just wanted to talk today a little bit more practically about wounds, and really more so what I mean by wounds. What are some of the common wounds that we experience throughout the course of our life, and then how those things impact our ability to perform, potentially or specifically in our career. So how past wounds, how past hurt, heartache, and tragedy impacts our ability to perform to the best of our ability now. Okay, so let's just dig right in. So when I talk about wounds, these are, again, as I just alluded to or shared, these are past hurts, past heartache, past tragedy that we have experienced that have had, initially at least, a negative impact on our lives. So there are so many things. The list would go on for days of all of the wounds that we may have, or somebody you know may have experienced. But there are some common ones that everybody has probably incurred at least one of these, if not more. And the first one, and some of these kind of overlap, but the first one would be childhood trauma. So that could be abuse, neglect, any other kind of adverse experience as a child that left emotional scars, that impacted our self-esteem, that caused us to struggle through relationships. So childhood trauma, that is a wound that many of us experience. And so I'm going to talk through just very briefly each of these wounds, and then I'm going to transition into how each of these wounds impacts our ability to perform today. So childhood trauma, number one. Number two is bullying. If you have ever been bullied, that would be a wound. You incurred a wound as the result of somebody else bullying you, harassing you, teasing you, just casting you aside or out. And that can create so many negative feelings. Things like insecurity, anger, and even anxiety being in social settings. So bullying. Number three, grief and loss. And these are in no particular order. These are just things that I've done research on, come up with, and put together as a list. So three was grief and or loss. Particularly, this is like around like the death of a loved one. Obviously, if you are a middle-aged adult, you have absolutely, certainly lost people to natural causes, which is already hard enough, but it can be even worse, and oftentimes is even worse when it's the result of some kind of tragedy, a disease, an event, and things like that, an accident. And so the death of a loved one is a traumatic experience for us as children, or for us growing up, even oftentimes for us as adults. And it really causes us to struggle to process the event, to struggle to process how it's impacted us. And even sometimes, and I know this one personally impacted me a little bit, it can make it hard to move on. Like you feel guilty about moving on, not to forget it, but to move on from it. So grief and loss. 4, relationship issues. Boy, oh boy. I have a laundry list of these in my past life previous to getting married, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced an issue in a relationship. Sometimes it's a romantic relationship, other times that is a friendship. My poor wife has just had so many awful friendships as a result of just giving herself over to people that turned out to be something that they weren't. And so this, we see these things as conflicts, as being betrayed, breakups. And man, those things just, amongst so many other things, they make it really, really difficult for us to trust people. Sometimes they make it difficult for us to see ourselves who we really are, because we start to develop kind of like this complex. And it makes it harder for us to commit to new relationships. So relationship issues. 5, family dysfunction. Boy, if you have not been the victim of a dysfunctional family, you are so fortunate. I mean, most people in society today, sadly, have been part of some dysfunctional family. But that causes us to struggle to communicate, to create and maintain boundaries, to trust other people. So again, like it just, these wounds that we incur just become so destructive to us. 6, addiction. This could be alcohol. This could be drugs. This could be sex. This could be gambling. I mean, this could be work. There are so many things that we become addicted to, and even after we've overcome it, we can still feel guilt. We can feel shame. This causes us to feel less than, like we're not worthy enough. It's just, it is a ravaging wound. Not to mention the fact that oftentimes it continues to chase us for the rest of our lives. Even though we no longer would be addicted to something like alcohol, we still have to protect ourselves from it because we can go right back into it so quickly. 7 would be a traumatic event or experience. Experiencing any kind of traumatic event could be a natural disaster, could be an accident, could be an act of violence, something that I'm very, very familiar with. This will lead to lingering feelings of fear, anxiety, and PTSD. I mean, it is just, it is so hard to go on living your life after experiencing a traumatic event. And I know many of you listening right now are like, yep, I know that for a fact. 8 would be mental health struggles. Mental health struggles are wounds that just absolutely destroy us oftentimes from the inside out, causing us to be depressed, to be anxious. Again, we can feel shame and guilt and unworthy. It does such a disservice to us when we experience mental health, and yet oftentimes it's such a hard event or issue to overcome. And the last wound that we can experience, again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the top ones that I've come up with, would be around career and or financial setbacks. So this could be failing to achieve a personal or a professional goal. This could be something like my family experience, which was losing our house to short sale on the back end of the 2008 recession, coupled with some irresponsibility on our part about managing finances. So this creates a lot of fear. It creates a sense of inadequacy, maybe even regret. There are just so many things that wound of a financial setback or financial devastation has on us. So across those 9, I am certain that every single one of you listening says, or watching, says right now, yep, that one for sure. Those 3, those 7, oh man, all 9. I mean, some of you, I am so sorry to say that you have experienced all 9 of those. And they can be so hard to deal with, often because as I write in my book, when we grow up, we're often conditioned to try to shake things off or to move past them instead of to deal with them. So we are ill-equipped to deal with this devastation when it actually happens to us. It's just so difficult. So we need to figure out why or how we get through these, absolutely. But I think it's important, and I'm going to leave that for another discussion. I've talked about that in past episodes. I've talked about that with some other guests. But I want to just briefly touch on, as I kind of land this, and again, I told you this was going to be a shorter episode. I meant it, but I think it's important to hit on each of these. So what I want to share is the impacts that these wounds specifically have on your ability to perform professionally. These can have a multitude of other impacts. Personally, they can be so devastating. They can be devastating in relationships. They can be devastating in friendships. They can be devastating in parenting. They can be devastating in your journeys for health and fitness. I mean, there are so many ways that those wounds can negatively impact you. But I just want to talk specifically about business, because most people that listen to this are in business. Either they're running a business, they're leading a business, they're at the top of their game, and you may not realize that in your consistent striving to be the best, and your desire to create a new strategy, to build new habits, while all those things are good, you may be leaving a stone unturned that once unturned could be the key to unlocking every bit of greatness you dream and desire for. So I just want to talk about how each one of those wounds can impact you professionally. So and I alluded to some of these earlier, but when we go back to childhood trauma, and again, some of these are going to sound similar in how they negatively impact you, but I just want to touch on each one of the wounds that I brought up. So childhood trauma, unresolved childhood trauma, or not completely resolved childhood trauma. As I said, this can lead to low self-esteem, It can lead to a difficulty in trusting other people. It can create challenges around forming healthy relationships. This can prevent our ability to then build the healthy relationships that we need in order to succeed with our teams, with our organizations, with our industries. It will hinder our ability to put ourselves into the places that we need to in order to move forward in our career. Childhood trauma can hinder your ability to be great at networking. It can cause you to be so overly reserved that you're not putting yourself in the places that you could in order to achieve the success that you desire. Bullying. Again, I talked about this before. I mean, something as simple as when you were 7 years old, somebody telling you that you were ugly on the playground could have incredible negative impacts on your ability to step out and to take risks now. It could hinder your ability to assert yourself in a professional setting. It could potentially limit your professional advancement because there are a lot of aggressive people, which I wish they wouldn't be, but unjustly or unrightly aggressiveness is just something that we regularly experience in business. And if you can't stand up for yourself because that person in some way reminds you of the 7-year-old person, putting you back into the 7-year-old version of yourself, which was bullied and made to feel less than and inferior, that's going to hinder your ability to push forward in the places that you do. We see bullies all the time, and we need to figure out how to deal with them. But if we haven't resolved the bullies from the past, we're not going to be able to, or we're going to have a very, very difficult time dealing with the bullies of the present. 3, grief and loss. I remember this happening and having to fight so hard against this, but when we experience loss, especially when it's something tragic, it creates a lot of emotional instability. It makes it really, really hard to concentrate. I mean, we just get into like these foggy places, which means that we're not going to be able to fully engage. I mean, I'm sure that if you have lost somebody close to you, especially tragically, you remember that period of time after the loss of what it took to go back to feel even not life as normal, just feeling normal inside of yourself. So grief and loss has the ability to do that very often. Relationship issues. Again, when we have wounds or when we incur wounds from bad relationships, it hinders the ability for us to trust other people and to build strong connections with other people, whether that's the people we work with, work for, or serve, being our clients. And what's interesting is on one hand, it can be hard to trust other people, but 2, it could cause us to not put ourselves out there enough to allow other people to get to know us, like us, and trust us. One of the greatest keys to sales is to be able to do that. But if you fear putting yourself out there because you've been burned in the past in a totally different context, maybe the same one, but even if it was a totally different context, that's going to hinder your ability to succeed because you need to get people to know you, like you, and trust you. And the best way to do that is to be yourself. But if you're afraid to be yourself, that's going to be a big problem. Family dysfunction. I mean, there is just a multitude of negative impacts as a result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. But a couple of them that come to mind for me are around communication. You could really, really struggle in your ability to communicate because maybe you grew up in a household where everybody just shut down or everybody just lit each other up. You may struggle with conflict resolution, and that can look one of 2 different ways. Either when conflict happens, you get in there as the aggressor and you just go for it. Or, and I actually see this one a lot more often, you struggle to have difficult conversations because difficult conversations were handled poorly in your past, by yourself, by somebody else. And if you cannot resolve conflict well, and you cannot communicate properly and professionally, you are going to really struggle to build the relationships that you need in order to succeed. It's just going to be so much more difficult. It's really hard to succeed on your own. Addiction. There are so many things. For some reason, I just yawned right in the middle of talking. So fascinating. Middle of the day on a Friday. Anyway, addiction has so many negative impacts, especially if it's unresolved. If it's unresolved, that is going to continue to creep into so many areas of your life and your business. But even if it's resolved in the sense of you're no longer addicted to whatever it was you were previously addicted to, you could find yourself attaching to new things and sometimes attaching to the wrong things. So that's a way. Sometimes you could struggle to fully commit yourself to something for fear of falling back into the trap of being addicted to something. So there's just a lot of little ways that addiction can creep in, even if you've resolved it and moved on from it. Traumatic events. Again, I know this one all too well. I mean, this took the most work for me, and that was overcoming the anxiety and post-traumatic stress that I felt after the shooting in Vegas. It was when conflict arose, I felt my adrenaline rush so high. It was my anxiety building up. I never used to have that before. But that's going to create so many challenges around focus, decision-making, relational capacity. There are just so many things that are negatively impacted as it relates to professional performance when you have had a past traumatic experience. Whether you were a survivor, an observer, whatever. Mental health struggles. So mental health struggles, especially when they're unaddressed, things like depression, anxiety, those will absolutely impact your ability to stay motivated, to stay driven, to deal with challenges, to overcome obstacles. You are going to really, really struggle. And then finally, if you've had previous setbacks financially or in your career, that inadequacy, that fear of failure is going to prevent you from taking some necessary risks in order to succeed to the degree that you want to succeed. So here's the thing. For me, and this is how I'm going to close. First of all, identifying and addressing those things, which is something that in my book, we have what's called the wound analysis framework. And you will see more of that as the book gets released. But we do have to acknowledge the fact that we were wounded, and we need to understand how those things impacted us. But here's the thing. Sometimes we don't understand just how devastating the wounds were that we incurred, especially when we're like, oh, it really wasn't that big of a deal, when it could be a far bigger deal than you think it is. But you're not seeing, you don't wake up in the morning and you're struggling to get out on the road and make some sales calls or whatever, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, you know what? This has got to be the result of when I was bullied before. You just don't automatically think that. And so what I would say is if you realize that you are struggling to focus, to make good decisions, to perform well in high intensity situations, then I would say, okay, there could very likely be something from your past that's unaddressed that needs to be addressed in order to grow in that area. It's not just about learning something new. It's about understanding what happened in the past, maybe unlearning the bad, relearning the good, and then moving forward. You see, too often when we experience challenges in our careers, we try to learn something new. That's why we try to look for the newest, latest, greatest book or video or podcast. We're trying to hear something new to help us resolve what we're experiencing in the moment. When in reality, oftentimes we have to go back to the past, not to drag it into the present, but to go back and address it, overcome it, learn and grow from it, and then apply that growth to the present. So again, it's more about going to the past than it is about adding something new to the future. So again, I would think more about what are my symptoms? What am I struggling with? What areas of business, performance am I not doing as well in? And is it possible that something from my past is impacting my present? When I coach, this is one of the things that I talk about with every single one of my clients. Sometimes it's not straightforward. Sometimes we do it in roundabout ways, the more that I get to know them and learn and understand them. But that would be my suggestion to you, is if you're struggling in specific areas now, then you need to reach back into your past to figure out if it was something back then. Because it would be just like going to the doctors, and not everyone's going to understand this because some doctors don't do this, but if you go to the doctor and you say, you know what, doc, my stomach hurts. And they're like, okay, take some medication to settle your tummy. And they do. Or they give it to you, and you go home and you take it, and it doesn't work. You're like, oh, that's weird. Why didn't that work? Because it may not have anything to do with just needing to settle your stomach. Maybe you have a virus. Maybe you ate something bad. Maybe you, whatever. There could be so many different reasons why you have an upset stomach. And so if a doctor was just to prescribe based on symptom, they would be making a big mistake. Great doctors want to understand the root cause of your problem. This is just like in physical therapy. I'm not a physical therapist, but just like in physical therapy, if I go into, or my chiropractor, when I go to the chiropractor and say, doc, my back is sore, my lower back is sore, rarely does he say, Ryan, okay, let's work on your lower back. What he normally says is, hey, Ryan, let me check out your glutes and your hamstrings, because if they are tight, they could be pulling on your lower back in ways that cause that type of pain, right? He's not addressing where the symptom is. He's trying to understand the root cause so he can fix it from the root. Same thing with us. If we're struggling with something now, go back to the root cause, address it, grow from it, and move forward. So hopefully that was helpful for you. Again, that wasn't an exhaustive list of wounds, but these are a lot of the things that I see, that I hear of, that I talk about with other people, and or that I've experienced myself. And in hindrances, again, that's not exhaustive either. Those are just some of the things that I see are hindering people in the present, and oftentimes they're the result of something that happened to the past or in the past. So my encouragement to you is to address it, to resolve it. If you want to become the men and women that God has created you to be in all its glory, in all its performance, achieving at the highest of levels, go back in and address these things. It will be so worth it for you. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you listening to this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you have any questions, concerns, feedback, please feel free to hit me up. I love to get messages of encouragement. If you just enjoyed the episode, it does make me feel good. Like I'm not just talking to nothing. If you have ideas, thoughts, correcting a statement, a question about something that I said, so just offer feedback. I would love it. Please share this with other people. Like it, share it, subscribe to Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, wherever it is you're digesting this. And then finally, go check out woundsbook.com. Right now, it's a landing page that we are gathering together a tribe, a community that's going to go out and preach this message to the world. But there's going to be a lot of other things that are going to be updated through that website and through you signing up there. So please go do that, woundsbook.com. I would appreciate it so much. Thank you guys. Have a great one. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.